everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I run a nonprofit called Whistleblower Aid. We support public interest whistleblowers. Those are people that are driven by their conscience to come forward, and they refuse to be complicit through silence on the bad stuff that they see. So let me tell you a little bit myself. I spent my entire life battling authoritarians around the world. I ran an international media company called Radio Free Asia that went toe-to-toe with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un and all of the really bad autocrats in Asia. And then in 2012, I created the Open Technology Fund that funds tools to protect people's digital lives. And if you use Signal, that was one of our very first tools. At Whistleblower Aid, we were designed for this moment. Mark and our other founder created Whistleblower Aid to fill a niche, and that was public interest whistleblowers, especially from the federal government. John himself, was a national security whistleblower. Mark was his lawyer, and even with their extensive experience, expertise, brains, and money, it was still incredibly difficult. So they realized there needed to be a nonprofit that would provide pro bono services, because more than half of the team and the board are public interest whistleblowers ourselves. We've been through this journey. We know what it's like, and so we are holistic in our support. It's not just legal representation. It's a media strategy. It's an advocacy strategy. It's therapy, it's, healthcare, home privacy, home protection, bodyguards if necessary. It's anything you need to bring the temperature down in your life while you're doing this incredibly important public service. Anyway, we thought that we would do a press conference today because we are obviously on the front line of what's happening in Washington, where I'm from. I always call it the heart of darkness because that's what it feels like right now. Mark is leading a lot of those efforts on Whistleblower Aid's behalf. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He is probably the most well-known whistleblower lawyer in Washington and certainly has earned his reputation. Ironically, he has been targeted by Trump for representing the Ukraine whistleblower that led to the first impeachment. Not his favorite. At Whistleblower Aid, 2 of our board members have also been singled out by Trump. Now Miles Taylor, who was our board member, is our client because he was the target, the first EOs that targeted individual people with the weaponization of the US government. It was Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs. So he stepped down the board, and he is now our client, and we are supporting federal whistleblowers that Trump is retaliating against through a website which supports a legal defense fund. It's called endpresidentialrevenge.org, but I can tell you a little bit more of that later. Mark.
Great, thank you, Libby. As Libby mentioned, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a national security attorney in Washington, D.C., where I've been for the last 3+ decades, taking on every administration since President Clinton. It didn't make a difference to me the partisan or ideological nature of who was in power. It was just holding whoever was in power accountable. This particular administration in its second go-around, though, takes it a lot more personally than anyone else before. So I want to start off with just this one quote. It is a confession of the weakness of our own faith in the righteousness of our cause when we attempt to suppress by law those who do not agree with us. And I think that quote very much symbolizes what is going on right now. But that quote was stated over a century ago by the New York State Governor Alfred E. Smith, who ran for president a number of times, back in 1920, because history is very much repeating itself. So what have we seen during this particular administration? We saw the Trump administration attack and dismantle any number of safeguards, the inspector generals of various agencies, the Office of Government Ethics, the Office of a Special Counsel, the Merit System Protection Board, the National Labor Relations Board, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, any number of universities. Harvard was in court today. any number of law firms and colleagues of mine who have been representing different cases that Donald Trump didn't particularly like. Perceived political enemies or adversaries. On the first day of office, President Trump issued an executive order against 51 former intelligence officers who had signed a letter back in 2020 about Hunter Biden's laptop. I represent 8 of those 51, and they had their security clearances stripped away. And of course, myself, as Libby mentioned, was the subject of a memo from the White House back in March, stripping me and a number of luminaries, the former President of the United States, the Vice President, the Deputy Attorney General, the Secretary of State, any number of people of whom I am not part of because I am a registered independent, always have been. But here it is, I've been grouped among these luminaries in the political world who have been either elected public officials like the Attorney General of New York or the District Attorney in New York, or who have held government office, of which I never have. Trump the Butcher, as I call him, named after Dick the Butcher, which is a famous Shakespearean character from Henry VI, because the famous phrase, "let's kill all the lawyers," is something that is prominent now today. And many of us who, if any of you have ever gone to law school, had a friend or a family member who went to law school, you used that at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever is in Canada. I think there is a Thanksgiving, right? Just in the month before ours, to make fun of your friend and family member about being a lawyer. But it was actually a compliment by William Shakespeare, because the lawyers were fighting against authoritarianism. And Dick the Butcher needed to kill all the lawyers in order to be able to take over and launch a coup at the time. A century ago in the United States, when we were just leaving World War I, we enacted the Espionage Act in 1917. And the next 3 years or so saw a lot of what we're seeing today of attacks on the First Amendment and outspoken criticism of the government under the Wilson administration. The difference between then and now, though, is that the courts were very capitulating to the executive branch back a century ago. And thankfully, we're not seeing that today. The true constitutional crisis that will happen in the United States is when, as we are starting to see, the executive branch turning its back to the judiciary and just ignoring court orders. And there's already been indications of that, but a lot of that is sort of up for challenge or discussion. Did we really oppose the order or refuse to comply or not? But as we're seeing with a number of the actions, particularly in the immigration field, where even the Supreme Court in 9-0 decisions were saying due process is imperative. Now, I was attacked by the president, called a sleazeball, said I should be sued for treason, which does not exist under U.S. law, but in Trump world it does, because I represented a whistleblower who lawfully blew the whistle on his activities with Ukraine back in 2019. The message is, if you, as the lawyer, represent someone who comes forward against the administration, not only will the whistleblower be attacked, but the head of the dog will be cut off rather than the tail, which was something from the Kennedy administration, of the notion of taking out the lawyers so that we can't do our job. So the loss of my security clearance would have prevented me from undertaking a lot of what I did in 2019, 2020 in representing whistleblowers during the first Trump administration. So we're here today to condemn the false Americanism which professes to maintain American institutions while dethroning American ideals. And that sounds like a great quote as it is. I can't claim credit to it. That one's from 1924 by the Supreme Court Justice Charles Evans Hughes, because unfortunately we're seeing history repeat itself so much. But hopefully as we go through the rest of this term, we'll start to see that the judiciary will hold up. Maybe the legislative branch will wise up, But organizations like us at Whistleblower Aid will continue to do what our job is. And as we talk about it in this conference with AI, much of obviously what we're all doing is now intersecting with technology, and technology can be both used for the good and for the bad. And we'll see which will obviously sustain itself. I think with that,
Thank you, Mark.
turn it back.
I would add that, as I said, I've been fighting authoritarians for my entire career. Something that's uniquely different at this time is the complicity between tech and tyranny. And so it's really fast-tracked the ability of this particular elected leader to turn our basic fundamental principles against us, because everything is sped up and much easier and more efficient. So just to give you an idea of the kinds of cases that we're doing now, we represent the USAID head of global health. He's the one that wrote the memo to the DOGE leadership about the short-term, medium-term, and long-term consequences to global health from shutting down all those life-saving activities. The memo was leaked to the New York Times, and they ran with it. And more recently, we launched a case with the NLRB cybersecurity expert, who went in after DOGE made its appearance and forced its way into their secure systems to look for forensics and how to track what DOGE is doing in the sensitive systems. So those are a couple of the cases that we're doing now in the Trump administration point two. But we can open it up to questions, because that's why we're here. Go ahead. I don't know who has the mic.
Beate Gillette, I run a podcast for Founders of the Future. So there's two things. First of all, I want to thank you. And my question is, you know, as it pertains to tech, I think Peter Thiel is like the most dangerous man currently on the planet because of his influence in technology. So what do we need to watch out for? And then number two, how do we help you? Because there's, you know, there's this much we can do, but we don't know what you know. But so how can we help you to be stronger?
Well, I'll take the first shot. For journalists, I think nothing's more important than the free press and the ability to get accurate and uncensored information. One of the hallmarks of an authoritarian regime is state-controlled media. And that can be direct, for example, CCTV or China Radio International, or it can be indirect. And authoritarians have shown us many, many ways that they have co-opted the media. Media's got to stay strong. It's got to stay pure. You got to do your job. And, you know, we work closely with our trusted media partners to make sure that the pressure from these giant corporations and from the US government, the President of the United States, will not interfere with the truth. And nothing is more important than giving each individual the ability to make informed decisions about their own lives. I think that's critically important. Mark?
So, as powerful as tech is, money speaks. You know, Peter Thiel helped fund the litigation against Gawker, which was actually a client of mine. I represent a lot of media entities and individuals, Wall Street Journal, MSNBC, Politico, Daily Beast, all of these have been clients of mine. And that lawsuit, the defamation case that put Gawker out of business, was because of the funding. And what we do at Whistleblower Aid, and what a lot of what I do in this administration and my own separate law firm, is to provide pro bono, for free legal representation to whistleblowers, to federal employees. I personally am uncomfortable in taking money from these federal employees who did nothing wrong other than be targeted. You know, it's one thing when my normal case would be someone loses their security clearance because they got caught drunk driving, and that's on them. You know, they're going to pay for legal representation. But the folks who get targeted for no reason other than maybe they spoke out, or they're in an office that the president no longer likes from a policy perspective, you know, we need funding to survive and to be able to do what we do. It's not about us making money. It's just being able to, you know, pay your own mortgages and college costs for your kids, et cetera, by representing all these individuals and doing the right thing.
And raising awareness about, there is an organization, us, who can safely help a client safely and legally bring their information forward. Our job is to protect the client so that they can do good for everybody.
Yeah, we do a lot of work now in the tech field, in the healthcare field. We represented the Twitter whistleblower, now X. We represented the Facebook whistleblower. My work is in the national security field, so I'm handling the classified aspects. And I created Whistleblower Aid with the co-founder John Ty to make sure that, frankly, we didn't have any more Ed Snowdens or Chelsea Mannings, and Chelsea was actually a client of mine as well, who would leak classified information illegally. We handle the matters lawfully. We go through the process. And in fact, the intelligence community whistleblower case and another case that I handled in the first Trump administration, which was the highest ranking whistleblower in U.S. government history, were absolute successesses without any laws being broken, which is
So
what
there
we
is a
stand
way,
for.
and so spreading awareness about that is really important. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the case of Reality Winner,
Okay.
who I believe is still unpardoned. And if I understand correctly,
She served her time.
She served her time. She took a single document. What should she have done differently? And is that the kind of outcome that whistleblowers can still expect? Because she's
It's a
obviously
great
still under
question.
surveillance.
I'm so happy you asked that question. We are very close to Reality, and we're soon going to do an op-ed with her about what the state of play for whistleblowers is. I think she'd be the first one to tell you that she considers herself not a lawful whistleblower, but rather a leaker. And, what happens when you illegally bring forward this information is you expose yourself to all kinds of things, like Reality did, and she went to prison on the Espionage Act. Mark knows more about this case, and he can talk to it. But that's why we exist, so that people don't end up going to prison for doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, for any of the leakers, there are options. Doesn't mean they're going to be successful, obviously, but there were other options that she could have pursued to go to the Inspector Generals, to go to members of Congress, where other individuals could have brought the information to light. And hers was about what the voting machines, whether the Russians had tried to infiltrate some of them at different state levels, and the states wouldn't have known about it. The federal government knew, obviously, about it because that was information that she was providing. The way she went about it obviously ended up backfiring on her because the Intercept, although frankly they would have caught her anyway, even if the Intercept hadn't been as
Blown it.
sloppy. The way that talk about technology, inside the intelligence community, it's very easy to track who prints documents, what printers they go to. And I think if I remember, only like 6 people had printed the one document that she had ultimately leaked. And of course, she communicated with the Intercept on email or cell phone, so it was not too difficult to figure it out. But there are a lot of times where we'll work with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and bring the information, and then they have the mechanism to be able to release it in a way
It's lawful.
that is lawful. When I represented our co-founder, John Ty, in the wake of Ed Snowden, John, who had been at the State Department, had information similar to Snowden. And we went through a lawful process to write an op-ed that was then cleared through the State Department and the National Security Agency, the NSA, and then appeared in the Washington Post that got his message across. And sort of
Lawfully.
opened the door lawfully, got his message across so that if others wanted to pursue it, they could.
I think that's a really good point. Over the years since we've existed, we're very new. Now we're getting a lot of referrals from investigative journalists because they understand how high the stakes are for their sources. And so they will send their whistleblowers to us. The answer is always make sure you talk to a lawyer before you do anything. Before you do anything.
Well, and now, again, with technology, when I'm advising media clients, You got to go back to old school. You think back to Deep Throat and Watergate and meeting, Woodward and Bernstein meeting in a parking garage, because, you all have your cell phones, so you're all being tracked by whichever government, and probably multiple governments, not necessarily actively, but if they wanted to. Even if it's not the government, the cell phone providers, right? They know where you are. The advertisers, they know where you are, and all of that can be tracked. So, if you're meeting with sources, you got to leave your cell phones at home. That's the golden rule.
Any other questions?
I think we have time
We
for
have time
one
for
last
one last
one.
question on this side.
Hi, Bob Mackin, the Breaker.News here in Vancouver. The trends that you're talking about happening in the United States are also happening up here, but not with the same velocity, and there isn't one point person as there is in the US, of course, with Trump. But we're seeing attacks on whistleblowers. We're seeing destruction of public records. We're seeing disobedience of public records laws. We're seeing governments not keep records when they should be keeping records of important decisions. And to that end, Signal has been an important method or tool for whistleblowers to reach journalists and to provide documents, to provide information. Now we're seeing Signal be used by the highest levels, Pete Hegseth, for instance. And here in Vancouver, Mayor Ken Sim, who brought WebSummit to Vancouver, was caught by the Integrity Commissioner at City Hall here using Signal to hold secret meetings of City Council. So what are your thoughts on this very important tool built for a very noble purpose being turned around against the public and against the media?
Okay, so I would say that Signal doesn't take any position, right? The only thing it is designed for is to protect the content of your communications with each other. So to that end, every project of the Open Technology Fund gets security code audits every year just to make sure that the thing is safe. And our philosophy when we created it was, obviously everything the Open Technology Fund created was to protect the digital lives of dissidents, activists, journalists, the people that authoritarians wanted to spy on. I think it's still serving that, and the philosophy was that if we got massive users, then the people most at risk, democracy activists and things like that, would get hidden in the masses, right? Because it used to be in the first few years, if you had Signal on your phone, you were doing something sketchy, right? But now everybody has Signal, everybody's using it. There are bad users and there are good users, but that's not Signal's job. Signal's job is to make sure that what you communicate with each other is private. And to that end, if you use Signal, please don't use it without disappearing messages. Otherwise you've defeated the purpose. Your digital security is only as safe as the sender and the recipient. So always keep that in mind. We don't control what people do on Signal. We just try to make sure that nobody can get the content once it's there, including Signal. Signal doesn't have any access to your content.
But in both countries, the power is with the people to hold the government accountable, not the other way around. And obviously, the use of Signal or any other personal device, we've had this, and I'm sure Canada has had it too. We had it both in Democrat and Republican administrations, the use of personal devices, personal emails, personal cell phones for work-related conversations that were then not preserved, and of which in the United States, and I imagine there's probably something similar in Canada, where record preservation laws require the government to maintain these records for a period of time so that we can get access to them later on to see what our government has been up to. So that continues to be a real problem. One thing that we'd love to do at Whistleblower 8 at some point as we grow is to branch out into other countries to do the same type of work, because what we do is needed in every country around the world. It's not anything unique, of course, to the United States. I guess I'll end and say I'm behind the times in programs that I watch, but I'm watching Handmaid's Tale now, which is probably not a very positive thing to watch at the time if you know the story, because it feels a little bit too real. But I'm reminded in the program how Canada is the home for us U.S. asylum seekers in Handmaid's Tale. So for those of you who are Canadian, do not become our 51st state. Stay free, please.
And I
we can
encourage
come
you
back.
to go to Mark's session on Friday at 2 o'clock. He's going to be basically speaking more about the challenges of the U.S. democracy. And I will be on center stage on Friday at 2:40 with our United Health Group whistleblower, whose case launched last week. You might have seen it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, thank you.